Welcome to No Camps Podcast. I'm Sunny G.
I'm Akash.
I'm Jason, and here on the No Camps Podcast, we talk about movies, TV. What else do we talk about? We talk about all kinds of stuff on the podcast, but today we're talking about Westworld, episode 7, Les Écorches, I guess. That's how to be pronounced.
I know you looked that up.
Les Écorches. I looked it up.
Yes.
So do you want to know what Les Écorches means?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the skinned.
Oh.
Interesting. Yeah.
As
So let's
those
keep
who
that in
have
mind.
been skinned?
Yes. Someone who has been flailed.
Like flayed.
Yeah, flayed. Not flailed. Flayed.
Yeah.
So he's been flailed. A flayed guy has been flailed around. Yeah.
They
So
flail when they get flayed. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, exactly. Couldn't have said it better. Yeah. So getting into this episode, just want to hear y'all's reactions. What did you think?
I'll go ahead and kick it off. I thought it was a really good episode. I really enjoyed it. A lot of good character moments. A lot of good reveals. A lot of good acting. Overall, great episode. Yeah, I mean, I really want to kind of dive in. I don't think I had nothing comes to my mind that it did not like, but maybe once we go through the episode, it'll refresh my memory a little bit more. But overall, positive thoughts on the episode.
Yeah, I'll say it's the episode I have been waiting for, finally.
Really? Yeah.
But
Okay.
in typical Westworld fashion, I'm still very confused. And still,
Yeah.
like, I have a better idea of things that are happening and still have no idea why some things have happened or will happen.
Would
But
you
yeah,
highlight
ultimately
some of
very
those
positive.
as we go.
Yeah,
through
as we go
Okay.
through, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it too overall. It answered. I mean, it just was a good plot moving episode. So I think like a lot is going to kick off from here, which was great. But like Sunny, I'm like really confused after the episode too, and there were several scenes throughout the episode where, like, I'm glad I have rewatched it because I had no idea what was happening the first time. So it had a lot of those moments too. But I mean, overall, I really like it. And again, they're just kind of trending up. I mean, where would you guys put this now? Because we kind of said that the first 3 were just kind of shitty, and now like after that, episode 4, 5, 6, and 7 now. I mean, where would you put it with these newer, better episodes?
I still think episode 4 is constructed the most beautifully from start to finish. I think it flows the best, and I think if you're just gonna contain these into one episode, I think it's the best self-contained episode. To me, it still is the embodiment of what Westworld is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's where they go to Shogun World.
No, that's the one right before it.
Right before it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking the Shogun World, I think, might be my favorite this season, aside from this one, just because, how foreign and familiar it felt. Like, just, it's almost like we're watching a season 1 episode all over again, just in Shogun World with much greater context of why things are the way they are. So for me, it was like super interesting.
And this episode does, in my opinion, the second best play with time compared to episode 4. I think this
I agree.
goes number 2 in its the way that it plays with time and the way some of the scenes play out. We can kind of get into that as we get into the episode, but I think it does it the second best out of the whole series.
What's kind of cool is Sunny and I watched like the first 4 episodes of season 1.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a good segue, I think. There were like moments and stuff. It was like really interesting revisit. And for some reason, like watching this episode, like I felt happy that I watched those particular episodes. So if I can try to remember, I'll pinpoint it. But it was like really cool timing. Like, would you agree, Sunny?
Yep. It was like very opportune. My aunt was wanting to get into it, so we watched those 4 episodes, and throughout those 4 and this episode, Jason and I looked to each other multiple times as we like picked up on moments that we had been talking about throughout this podcast,
Right.
And especially when we get to this episode, it calls back to a lot of very familiar lines and emotional points from at least those 4 episodes, and I'm sure throughout the first season.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so let's get right into it. So we open up with Ashley, who comes to Bernard, who's they're down in the Delos headquarters, and he's really suspicious of Strand and the Delos team. Strand is like one of the bald leader. I learned their names this episode. So he's all suspicious of Strand and the team, and saying that they're here for this project of theirs. So they leave. They try to get out, find a phone, and they get stopped by Strand, who says that he wants a key, and takes them to this place where Teresa Cullen died. As they walk into that place, that familiar place that we saw with bloodstains still on the wall, one of the team members finds this room, and when they walk in, it's basically just a room full of Bernard's damaged extra bodies. And then Strand turns his gun on Bernard. And that was our episode opener.
Pre-credit opener, yeah.
Pre-credit, yeah.
Cold open.
It was great.
Cool. Suspicious.
I'm really loving the scenes from the previous episode. I think now it's like 2 episodes in a row that they do without any dialogue. They just kind of play with some audio, like some music, classical music or something, and they just play out the scenes. And
you mean the
really
recaps?
Cool. The recaps, yeah.
Yeah.
But no, this opening scene was awesome, man. Like it really like leads you in. They're about to kill Ashley, and you think Bernard's about to save him, but I mean, it's very, just very like convenient for them to find that door right in the moment, save both of their lives. But plot armor is thick. But yeah, I love that reveal. I thought it was really, really cool that they just had a room full of Bernards. It's so like damning in that moment, right then and there.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's like absolute. Like right when they open it, they see it's all Bernard.
Right.
Yeah, and it was really weird to me. What stuck out to me is like Charlotte opens it. She's like, "Oh wow, you got some skeletons in the closet."
Mm-hmm.
She seemed like weirdly calm about it. Yeah, like she knew. Like this was the evidence she was looking for, and she found it.
Mm.
And I don't know if that was like a choice from the actress, or if that was supposed to be in here, because they spent time together before this, right? So I don't know. It just I kind of I like that moment, I guess, or I kind of like that kind of suspicion there. But what did you guys think? Bernard was going to stop them from basically killing Ashley. They just assumed it was going to be Ashley. Did you guys think he was going to confess in that moment?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he had a choice, and we kind of learned later on that it's in his nature to be kind, and we hear later on that he doesn't have what it takes to survive. And it comes first nature, like it comes very quickly to him to sacrifice himself to save someone else, right? So you see that in that moment that he's immediately like willing to give a bit of information because he's not conniving or cunning enough to really be like a bad guy. And we see it right then and there, which is an interesting point because I kind of see some other scenes where Bernard really goes out of his way to not kill people. And you see that now you see it in previous episode too, where he's avoided violence, I think, a lot.
Yeah, I mean, because he doesn't he's going to take away his will, or what he basically says. He kind of like in control of him later, but I liked that was like a small little hint at like, he still kind of makes the choice. He's kind of awake in a sense too. He's very self-aware, and he's kind of, I think, dictating his moves at this point, and that's all going to come.
I don't know.
You don't think so?
I disagree with that, man. I feel like he's the most conflicted out of all the hosts, because in my mind and what's been displayed, it feels like there's such a scramble in his code that he is constantly trying to figure out what is happening, and doesn't really have the time or the wherewithal to have a motive to do anything other than to figure out what is going on. And we're kind of like the surrogate too of Bernard, right? Because we're also trying to figure out what the mystery is, and we're stuck with him trying to figure out what's going on. So I don't think he is awake in that sense. He just seems confused to me. He's like the most confused host out of all of them, and it seems that he's trying to piece everything, and he's nowhere near like Dolores or Maeve in being awake, I think.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, I guess you're kind of right in that sense. I mean, he was having like visions and stuff along the way too. So yeah, you're probably right. I mean, do you think that's like part of the damage, or it's just because Ford is still programming this guy? Like Ford is still he's still Ford's experiment, you know?
It
I
could
mean,
be a
I think.
combination of both, right?
Well, I think it can be a combination of three things. Like, so one, like he could be just deteriorating, like Jim Delos, right? So that could be contributing to the very consistent face of confusion that he's worn throughout the season.
Mm-hmm.
Then there is Ford's meddling, and like whatever Ford is manually doing to him to suppress him or confuse him or control him or something like that. And then there is the general sense of like his free will, but still through the lens of like how he was programmed. So like, I mean, yeah, I think when he's going to admit that like Ashley was innocent and it's me, like I think that's mainly just him being him and acting under his own free will. However, that still was always constrained by what Ford created, and yeah, and I think all of the rest of his confusion and the rest of his like general nonsensicalness throughout the season can just be chalked up to him progressively failing.
Yeah, and Sonny, to your point with the degradation, they might or might not have like explicitly shown us that, because we see the room with all those decommissioned Bernards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know when they were decommissioned and when this version of Bernard was commissioned. I think it's an assumption to say that those versions either degraded or degraded, or they couldn't handle having his memory and consciousness in a body, and they were just decommissioned. And this body that Bernard is in might have been commissioned right before the incidents, and the incidents. When I say that, I mean the death of Ford kicked off the series of events. Could have been commissioned then. I mean, we don't really have a timeline, but I think all of those older Bernard bodies leads me to believe that maybe that could be a cause.
I mean, for all we know, there could also be future Bernard bodies, right?
Right. Yeah.
Mixed in with old ones. Like there's one that had fates fucked up, so you could assume that maybe that one was being debugged and he had already used before.
Right.
There's no telling that the other ones themselves might have been brain spanking new and just waiting for a control unit.
Sure.
Yeah, interesting. All right, well, moving on. We see Charlotte. She's interrogating Bernard, asking about Abernathy's control unit. Ashley comes in, says that the train explosion wasn't an accident. It was the hosts, and the security team take off to go stop them. As they're down there trying to kill off the invaders, they stumble upon a pile of dead Respawn team members, and then are suddenly taken down by Dolores and her whole crew. Charlotte then orders for Abernathy's control unit and data to be like manually extracted, and then they realize that the hosts are coming for the cradle.
So is this a scene where we see the air quotes badasses being sent to go check out the lower levels, and they're given some sort of like vest with the lighting thing?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
That's what I remember now. That was my least favorite part of the episode. Why the fuck would you want your chest to light up and show you where the hosts are when you could have something more intuitive like goggles, or even better, like have some sort of programming to where like the vest, if you're wearing it, would make you blind to the host. Similarly, like when they say when I'm sorry, the lady's name asks Bernard if she sees that, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Anything other than something not intuitive at all. It makes no sense. Sorry, this is really nitpicky, but it makes no sense to me to have your vest light up. A, give away your position, and B, like, oh, so you have to look down to really tell like what direction is coming. It's not intuitive at all. Like,
what do you mean? You feel it in the direction that you see them.
Would you would you rather not have like some sort of contact or anything else other than a vest to tell you where the fucking hosts are? And
yeah, I mean, like, yes, yeah. I think if beggars could be choosers, then yeah, you would probably prefer something like that.
I get what they're going for, but even visually, it didn't look good. Like, if it's supposed to be some sort of visual flair to give the episode like some sort of like, I don't know, something cool to look at, that didn't work for me either. I'm sorry, it made zero sense for me I would never wear that. If anything, that would make me a bigger target.
I thought it was cool.
The payoff was for for all of them to light up when they get surrounded by Dolores. You know, so that way you saw it was the same thing. It was the water rumbling in Jurassic Park to know that the T-Rex was coming.
Yeah, but that was done so much better. Any sense of dread or like foreshadowing. Ugh, God, I roll hard on that. Sorry, but yeah, let's move on. The scene was great. Yeah.
Well, no, I think it's worth mentioning though. At the beginning, when Hale is torturing Bernard, that happens before. I mean, that happens in present time. Right, but then the scene transitions to like I guess roughly a week prior to the latest events.
Like Ashley comes into the scene, like it's like a same cut of that scene, right, where he's walking into that room with Abernathy, and it looks. I mean, I think it's cut really well to make you question like what timeline until you move further on. But I thought that was very well done.
Yeah. All right, so in our next scene, Bernard is back in Sweetwater with Ford and the Mariposa. Bernard realizes that he brought Ford's consciousness to the cradle before he died. It was his consciousness that he was questioning earlier. Ford shows Bernard that the park was basically an experiment observing guest behavior in order to better create artificial life after death. And he says that he can only survive in the cradle, and he can't survive, he says, more than 3 days out in the real world. And Bernard asks what's in the valley beyond, which is the place that they're all the hosts are trying to go to. That was the end of that scene, which I just love Ford, man. Like everything about Ford, but he has like such charisma on screen. And I noticed throughout this episode, I write down quotes that I really like in the episode. And in this episode, they were all Ford's. And one quote that I like that he said here is, I don't think God rested on the seventh day. I think he reveled in his creation, knowing it would someday all be destroyed. And it's just shit like that. Like, I don't know if that necessarily has deeper meaning, but it just encapsulates this character so well. Just he feels so in control of his creation. And it's really, really fun to watch on screen.
I agree. His dialogue was great. His whole explanation of what was going on, it confused me a shit ton, but it was also like delivered so well, I thought.
Yeah, and I loved how he's telling Bernard what's up. Like, I liked how they were observing the guests or the hosts were observing guests and noticing little flickers and changes in guest pattern. And they were going to use that was the DNA that they were extracting. That was the important data that was going to help them create like convincing artificial life. And,
but what I don't understand is why, like when Jim Delos was turned into a host, like are we supposed to assume that that's actually like Jim Delos, or that's just a clone of him? Because if it's just a clone, then why would you care if you had a clone or not? Like ultimately who you are dies, right? So Ford says something in all this conversation about they learned how to copy a mind, but they couldn't get the rest of it right, basically. So like early on they cracked the code, so to speak, of how to get a consciousness in a digital format. But I think what they didn't have right was like how to keep a body or how to build a host that can sustain that, can sustain like a human consciousness. And so I think that's what some of this is, like all those iterations of Jim Delos, I think were just like updates over time, that they gathered by having more and more guests in the park. No, I get all that. What I'm asking is, what is the actual point? Like, who is paying the Westworld company to do that? Like, what does Jim Delos get out of being able to make a copy of himself live forever?
That was like a business venture, isn't it?
I'm asking what it is.
He wouldn't do it unless he would get a return on it. He would prefer death rather than not get a return, is what they say about Delos, right?
Right. What's the return come from, though?
I have no idea.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. My whole takeaway was that the ability to live past death was not you're not able to do that in our reality. My understanding was the only life after death is inside the cradle, and that's the only place where your consciousness can survive and doesn't degrade.
Right. Yeah. So that's one takeaway, right? Like they have this intermediary VR world that you can live in. But even then, I guess part of what I'm asking is like, are we to believe that the Ford we see in this episode is actually Ford versus a digitized, computerized version of Ford, like carrying out all of his same intentions and desires or whatever, just in the virtual world as opposed to in the real world. Is that what we're supposed to take away from that?
It felt like the Matrix, right? Like kind of like it felt like the Matrix, but like in a little slightly different sense,
my perception though, guys, was that this was a version of Ford up until the moment that he got shot. So everything that this copy is carrying out is only limits itself to the thought processes and motivations that Ford had up until they made the copy of him and put him into the cradle. I don't think that this version of Ford is free thinking and has a, in air quotes, like a will to do anything past this. Like he's got a narrative, right? And essentially back to Jason's quote about saying God reveled on the seventh day before his creations was destroyed. Like he knows that the cradle is done, right? And he finds a way out, and he's still finishing his fucking story, which is to get to the valley of the valley beyond or whatever whatever they call that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Sonny, I just think his motivations are limited, and they are to finish the story, and that's it. I don't think it's to find any sort of life, because I feel like what we see right now, like I'm just repeating myself now, but it's literally the only motivation that he had before death. It doesn't grow or change or have the ability to like take in new information and like rationalize and change any decisions. It's just kind of like carrying it out till it's done.
He's not looking for eternal life, right?
Yeah. So what's unintentionally, maybe on your behalf, very interesting about what you just said is that you pretty much just described a host.
Yeah.
So it's like once you get your consciousness cloned and into the cradle, you are no different than any other host, because you are just given like your backstory, and now you kind of just exist in this world to carry out whatever motivations that your backstory had given you.
Right.
Yeah, which is really interesting. But then that also just kind of begs the question, if you can create a host from a human being and you can have hosts living in the real world, then what's so difficult about the host you created from a human being also living in the real world, like in a host body, you know?
That is
like,
not, they don't give us much scientific proof other than just that offhanded line saying, oh, our minds are not able to accept the reality of after death, you know?
Yeah.
No,
especially when it has no problem doing it inside the computer.
Well, the problem, like I was just making a counterpoint saying like there's so many variables in life, right? But even then, in a controlled environment, Delos wasn't able to handle those variables, even though they were the same thing for 30 plus years in that chamber. Like his mind wasn't still able to handle that. I don't know. It's a good point.
All right. Just want to make sure we, because that was a really interesting and kind of confusing scene, but
it was my favorite by far. I don't know what you guys thought. Like that was the peak. Like any of the scenes with Hopkins in it, I just ate up in this episode. Yeah,
there's a couple of them in this episode, which makes it awesome, because there's a lot of Dolores in this episode, which I'm not a big fan of, but there's so much Ford. It makes it it counterbalances all the Dolores.
And a great production secret, right? There was no leaks about Hopkins being on set or anything.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. I'm not sure if there were, and I just didn't pay attention. But as far as I knew, and I didn't like seek out this information, I didn't know he was going to be in this season. So yeah, very well kept secret, if it was.
All right, so after that, now we see Maeve and her daughter that are still running away from the Ghost Nation, and they find this cabin to hide in. We see the Man in Black enter in the cabin, trying to fight off the Ghost Nation, because they were, in the last episode, they were being chased down by them as well. They both recognize each other when they're in the cabin, and the Man in Black suspects that Ford sent Maeve, which she just immediately dismisses and shoots the Man in Black. He runs out of the cabin and trying to hide from her, and Maeve uses her magic witch powers and sends nearby hosts to come and attack and shoot the Man in Black, which he is still in disbelief and thinks it's on behalf of Ford. And Maeve is about to basically assassinate the Man in Black after he's been shot down, and Lawrence intervenes. She tries to use her force powers on Lawrence too, but he's somehow able to resist and has the memories of the Man in Black in his past lives, shooting his wife. And he turns to kill the Man in Black. He shoots the Man in Black as well. And right before he gives him the final blow, the Ghost Nation and the Delos team enter and steal away Maeve's daughter and shoot down Maeve. And right as the scene ends, we see Lee saving Maeve's torn up body, and they leave. And we see the Man in Black somehow still surviving.
Is that how the show ended last episode? I don't remember her running. It seemed really like odd to me the way they stitched that up.
They were confronted by that Ghost Nation guy, right? Who said like, "We're on the same path. Follow me." And I think she rejected it, and that's the last we saw of Maeve.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah,
this was a crazy scene.
It was crazy. I wasn't a huge fan of it. I thought it was okay. I thought them running each other was a little convenient, and it gives her a little bit of a redemption against the Man in Black. But him getting saved in the nick of time was, pretty convenient, in my opinion. I don't know what you guys thought. I wasn't really blown away by this scene that much.
So you go, Sonny.
I'm just blown away that he's still alive.
Yeah,
seriously.
What a badass. And it's only Ed Harris. I feel like that could pull a character off that could get shot that many times and still be kicking it,
Yeah, he's like scrappy, he'll somehow make it, But I thought it was interesting again. Maeve and Lawrence got their redemption on Man in Black, and it's just kind of like you wanted to see Maeve get her revenge, but we don't want to see the Man in Black die, so we just kind of got both. We got both of that in the scene, so it was satisfying, but this felt one of the most ham-fisted scenes in the
I felt the same way. It didn't really flow that well. Maybe it could have been saved, but yeah, it just felt very forced. I agree with you there, Jason.
All right, so then we move on, and we see Ford and Bernard in the cradle, and Ford takes Bernard to Arnold's home that they created in the cradle, and it's the same place where Ford created Bernard. He reveals that Dolores also helped establish fidelity in Bernard, and Ford tells Bernard that he just doesn't have what it takes to survive, and takes back his free will. And then we see Bernard back with Elsie in the physical cradle, where Elsie says that the Mesa system is back online and is no longer clogged. I like that scene.
Yeah, me too. So are we to assume that, Ford was what was clogging it, right? And now that he's out of the cradle, it stopped all these systems from malfunctioning?
Yeah, I think he just got out of the way.
Okay.
I think once he got to have the conversation with Bernard and I guess tell him what he felt like he needed to tell Bernard, I think he just stopped fucking with the rest of the system and helped let it reboot properly or whatever.
Yeah. The reveal with Dolores and Bernard and her checking for his fidelity, that was explained extremely well.
Yeah.
I love that part the most. Probably my second favorite scene of this whole episode. Just that she is the one that knew him the best, and was able to check for fidelity. And we'd assume that all of the consciousness and hosts were developed in a digital plane by Ford and Arnold.
I think so, to a certain degree.
So how would they access this digital space?
Who?
Ford and Arnold. Would they inject themselves into this 3D space and work on these hosts, or how was that done? I wanted a clear explanation on, they say Arnold.
How do humans get into the cradle?
Yeah.
No, that's a good question. Maybe that's like an element that they'll leave for season 3, where they. I don't know. Part of when I mentioned earlier how this starts asking a lot bigger, broader questions. I think one of the big ones is what is the actual fundamental relationship between Ford and Arnold, and what led Ford to create Bernard, and why did he create him the way he did, and like what more went on between Ford, Arnold, and the Cradle in the founding of the park, like as Delos was getting involved and stuff. I feel
Right.
like there's so much more story to explore there, and that would definitely be one of the elements. Is like showing in some vision or backstory them jacking into the Cradle.
Right.
My question there was, Ford was explaining that, you spent a lot of time with Dolores and she was looking for fidelity, and eventually you were able to fool Dolores, is what he said. I don't get that. Like, I don't get how Bernard is able to like advance and develop to the point where he can. I mean, I don't know. That just seemed kind of weird. It almost seemed like, well, Bernard is like a higher performing android than Dolores, or like how come Dolores seems so. She seems so involved in everything, but like remained so stupid for so long.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And she only has like a limited set of data points to test his fidelity on. I mean, she hasn't experienced what Arnold is like when he's with his family. I mean, like this fidelity is basically he's exhibiting a certain behavior that she's only observed. So it's only foolproof to a certain degree, right? Inherently, based on like the history we know of Dolores and Arnold. Right?
Yeah, then again, I think that's as much as Ford needs from an Arnold clone, right?
Right.
Is like his capabilities of acting as a manager of Westworld, and a builder of these hosts and stuff like that. So,
Right.
as if that's all that Dolores knows about him, and that's all that's needed to do the job, I feel like you have a perfect match, right?
Yeah, it also like begs to ask, the question back in season 1, like when Bernard is doing all the analysis on Dolores, she must have been like, bitch, like what the fuck?
Yeah.
It just must have been like, obviously her memory or whatever must have been like renewed and refreshed, but like it must, if she was able to access it back then, I mean, it must have been a weird like looking in the mirror kind of situation. Like we've done this so many times beforehand.
Or it's like, I taught you, I got you here. I taught
Right.
you. I saw you when you were in beta testing. But yeah, that's the one thing I just didn't get was just using this android to fool. Like I don't know. Anyways, fool. It was still a good scene.
So one thing we didn't mention in the previous scene is that like Bernard asks Ford, like, where's this narrative going? What is the Valley Beyond? And then Ford dismisses the question just by saying, like, isn't the best part about a story figuring out the ending, yourself?
Yeah.
I love that answer.
Yeah, great answer.
I mean, it is true, right?
Yeah.
But then it comes up again in this scene when he says that Bernard doesn't have what it takes to survive. Like, it's just not in his nature. I think kind of implying that he just couldn't have built him that way because of all of the information they had to build him in the first place. And then talks about how you guys... Sorry, Bernard makes the claim that he never gave him free will, and Ford says he did, but then says... Well, do you remember the exact words? Like,
yeah, he's like, but you have no need for it
until I take it back from you.
Yeah.
What do you guys think that means? What's at the Valley Beyond? Yeah.
I don't know, man. It's just so confusing to me.
Isn't the Valley Beyond the Cradle?
No. Like, it's clearly not.
It's
'cause they
yet
destroy
it's
it.
the next destination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm curious as to figure out
yeah.
what that is. I mean, that has to be revealed next 2 episodes at least.
So yeah, presumably the scene that we see in a video clip in the very first episode of Dolores killing one of the Ghost Nation Indians, and then telling him like not all of us can make it to the Valley Beyond. That should take place like in the next episode or two, right after the events of the past storyline.
Yeah, 'cause
Um,
clearly
that's true.
she's heading there at the end of the episode.
Right.
You see her on the horses, and they're leaving.
Right.
So
And so yeah, but again, like I guess this is why I really like this episode, because a lot of things kind of became clear, but we still have just so many open-ended questions.
Mhm.
Like what
Just a
does it
box,
mean?
man? It's another box.
The fucking mystery box.
We're just
Yeah,
getting inside of the box.
yeah,
I-
unfortunately, the show doesn't answer the question. Like, I mean, my mind immediately goes to like, how does this technology work? Like, what is the limitations of like all of these characters and like their consciousness, and with the host, right? But
Hmm.
the show's not about that. I don't think we'll ever get some of those
Yeah.
answers. It's more about, I don't know, true awakening of a sentient or like a artificial intelligent being, I guess.
I mean, like normally I'd be okay with that, and in general, like I think I'm having to learn to live with not
Yeah.
having that kind of information from the show. But at the same time, it's that kind of like quote unquote factual grounding that gives real weight behind decisions, choices, and consequences, like in the show, right? So like the less they let us understand, the less impact the dramatic elements of the show like could end up having, you know?
Yeah.
So like when I don't know the extent of the free will that he has given or hasn't given, and like what it actually means for these hosts, it just kind of it makes it a little harder to appreciate Maeve's storyline and Dolores' storyline. We to a certain degree we still don't know how much of Maeve's own actions is not scripted, because we know that she was scripted to get awake and to like run into Bernard for a season, because he shows her. And in the same vein, Bernard makes the claim earlier in this episode to Ford that like you made Dolores kill you, and he says no, I understood her and I gave her the option to, and with understanding what she would probably do, right? But she's the one who still pulled the trigger. So even then, like he's kind of almost implying that like the way things are panning out are more or less in the way he wanted them to, but
right.
whether it's a result of his own direct machinations or just like engineering the system so that it could only go in one direction, it's still unclear, right? And then the more that's unclear, the less less easy it is to appreciate some of the actual dramatic elements of the episode, like for example Maeve's journey to find her daughter,
Yeah, also there's a limitation with storytelling if you ground it too much with like
agree
with
it's
facts.
a balancing act.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. So they have
definitely
to find that balance there.
Yeah, but I feel like they're leaning on they're imbalanced in one direction, away from having any grounding, and more kind of just leaving everything up to a mystery and then just introducing shit whenever they want, which is working pretty well. But like, I don't know, I think I'm getting a little tired of it.
That's fair. That's fair.
All right, well, then we see Dolores and her crew storm into the Delos headquarters as Ashley is asking Charlotte what's inside Abernathy's head, which she says is an encryption key, which you keep hearing throughout this episode. Teddy and Dolores come in to save Abernathy. Charlotte tries to reason with Dolores, but Dolores ain't having none of that. Dolores asks how to get the key out of Abernathy. And then we suddenly then see Bernard, who sees visions of Ford. Or actually, what do you guys think of that little bit? Do you have anything to say there? Can we just move on? All right, we'll just move on. All right, so Bernard sees visions of Ford, who's basically instructing him through the Delos headquarters. Gunfire starts to break out between Clementine, Angela, and the Delos team. Clementine gets shot and killed. Dolores says that she knows what the project is, a secret project of Westworld, and hopes that eternity will end when she destroys the Valley Beyond, in her quotes. She says that her backups are basically just chains. They're ropes that are holding them down. We see Angela then get inside the cradle, getting approached by a security team member. She seduces him, grabs a couple grenades, and blows up the cradle. So yeah, kind of an action-packed sequence there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So what is the decryption key?
This encryption key?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
decryption key.
What is that? What it is?
Yeah. What do you think it decrypts?
I have no idea. The only thing they're characterizing it as is the way to get to the Valley Beyond, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is
So ticket in.
the ticket in, like the key to get in, wherever that is. Yeah, I don't know. It's a really good question to ask.
So I'm thinking the Valley Beyond just means the area beyond the island, like getting off the island, the real world, quote unquote.
But then why would she need a control unit? Why would they need a...
Right. So the key is in the control unit, right?
Right.
I don't know why Dolores would need the key, nor do I
Yeah.
know
Why
why
would
what's her face would also need it.
Yeah, that's
Hale.
what I was gonna get at. Like, why would that key serve two different purposes? Like, why would one key allow them to leave the island, and also, why is that key necessary for Charlotte's like end game or whatever? It can't
Mm.
service both of their needs, right? I mean, I think it does, but I don't think in the way that you're describing it. I don't think
Yeah.
it's a way to actually get out. Um,
Well, I mean, Dolores saying she's going to destroy the Valley Beyond. She's going to destroy something.
hmm
So, I mean, I don't know. Is it like another type of database? Is it another type of cradle that they can like literally blow up?
What's the quote that talks about the key, and that you read?
The quote I have is when, which basically Dolores is saying, how do I don't know where is it? Anyway, I think the direct quote is eternity will end when I destroy the Valley Beyond.
Okay.
So she was implying that she knew that they're basically like in search of eternal life, like trying to become hosts.
Right.
And she's saying like that shit's gonna be over when I destroy this place. When I destroy the
I
Valley
mean, she
Beyond.
doesn't want that, right? She
No.
wants a true life, because once you die, you die. That's freedom to the host.
Well, yeah. So no, again, I think that's what kind of reinforces my idea that the Valley Beyond means the human world and the rest of the world.
Oh, because she
Yeah.
did say earlier in the season that she wanted to destroy.
Yeah.
That she
It's
wanted
not
to take
enough
away
to
the
get-
world from the
Yeah.
humans, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Who in your guys? This is off topic, but who in your mind characterizes most accurately what everyone other than Dolores' intentions are? Like, is Teddy supposed to be the surrogate for the other hosts, and why are these other hosts so inclined to follow Dolores? Like, I mean, I understand you can't characterize every single host and tell us their motivations, but who in this show is embodiment of all the other hosts? Is it just Teddy? Is it him?
I think it's still like other hosts still they're not as free or as conscious as Dolores and some of these select hosts are. So I think that she's kind of manipulating the narratives that have been programmed into them. You know, they all have these like higher beliefs. Wyatt, there's these like revered characters that she's kind of embodying, and I think like in their programming, it's to follow this
So she's
person.
still manipulating them and using the phrase of free will as to, like, I mean, it's very cultish, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she like, and we saw Maeve tell her that later in the episode when she's looking at Teddy or Deddy when he's all souped up,
That scene too, like, made me less. I feel kind of I may have given Maeve too much credit. I feel like she is maybe stuck in some sort of like programming about saving this child. Like, she doesn't seem free. She's like, even I think Dolores says something about like they create these backstories to bind you down or something.
So the kin they give you, the kin they create for us are ropes.
Right, and
Yeah.
it's surprising to me that Maeve is not able to see through that, but she still has some sort of like deep connection with.
No, I think she knows. I mean, and that she kind of explained in the last episode where she's going to choose fate even if it's death. You know, she wants her daughter, and now she met her daughter again, and she saw that her daughter doesn't think that she's her mother, but she still wants it. I think that's her free will. That's her choice. You know, it's the destiny that she's kind of chosen for herself. That she's gonna find this girl and get her out of this shithole of Westworld.
Right.
So I wouldn't say that she's still. I'd say that she's still awake, or I didn't question her self-awareness in this.
Yeah, that's why. I
episode.
mean, I feel they undercut Maeve's story just so they can get Dolores and Maeve to interact, and have that scene together.
Well, I liked it. Maeve called it. I mean, I guess we can talk about that more when it actually happens. But
Oh, my bad. We jumped ahead.
yeah, no, it's okay. What did you guys think of the security guard that wanted to, like, who just was being seduced by Angela down in the cradle?
Yeah, I thought he was an idiot.
Yeah, what a
It
jackass.
didn't. I mean, it didn't make any sense. He knows exactly. There's no. He's a bonehead. I mean, straight up bonehead. There's no excuse for his mistakes. And why would he think that he's just why would he not shoot her? Like, as soon as he sees her just standing there, frozen no matter what, like, there's a massacre happening. Just play it safe.
Yeah.
Put a bullet in her just in case before you approach her.
Do you think he was going to get some action, like, in the cradle in the midst of this battle? Like, I didn't get that.
It's just like, I don't like it when they make people stupider just to move the plot. It's not even to move the plot forward. It's just to give us a dramatic scene. For what's that host's name? Angela. Just to give Angela a triumphant moment. She
did that great line though at the end, right?
She did. Yeah.
Welcome to Westworld.
Yeah. Wasn't very happy with that, but I mean, it is what it is, right?
Well, I'm sad to see her and Clementine are gone, or seemingly gone.
Yeah.
Those were two originals, man. Those are like part of that first cast of hosts.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so then moving on, we see Dolores with Charlotte in that room, threatening to saw into Charlotte's head. But before she does, Abernathy speaks to Dolores and kind of stops her. He says, in quotes, "They broke my head and filled it with howling and sorrow." Then we see Teddy wrestling with Coughlin, who's the older bearded tough guy, Della's security guard. So Teddy's wrestling with Coughlin and basically beats him to death. So you can forget that name right away. Abernathy is speaking to Dolores before she basically manually extracts his control unit out of his head. And they have a very touching father-daughter moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really good moment. I just liked how Charlotte suddenly starts like whining and crying and just to save her own life. She's been very, very smug in most, if not all, of the scenes we see her in.
And she was... Sorry.
Well, I think it felt characteristic.
Yeah.
She only actually shed a tear and started begging right when that saw was like 5 inches from her skull. And I think anybody in that position.
No, I loved it. I'm not saying it's out of character,
okay.
but it's just like I love seeing it be her getting flipped,
defeated.
Defeated, like, position of power like that. It was very nice to see that.
I agree.
Well, especially because earlier in the previous scene with those two, she was all like, "Wow, this is really impressive what you've done. Like, I want to celebrate this milestone that you've come to." It's like, geez,
you want the key, bitch? You wouldn't even know what to do with it if you had it.
Yeah, but she got saved twice, very conveniently,
So I want to go over some of the.
We knew she was going to make it, though. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. We knew. Yeah. It's just like I just wish they didn't show her like. It looked like the Chappelle skit where he drops the water on the table and he's like, "I'm out," and it's like dips. Like it seemed very like reminiscent of that, of just like knocking shit out of the way and busting out. So,
oil? Who's talking about oil? Bitch, you cooking?
Yes.
But I like what she's like, please don't do this, and Dolores like, don't. Yeah, begging doesn't help when you've lived the lives that I've lived.
You would know.
Begging, begging doesn't help. That was raw. But I do want to talk about the dialogue with Abernathy because he had some really cool dialogue. Or he says, "One fire burns out another burning. Like one pain is lessened by another's anguish."
Mm-hmm. Is that Shakespeare?
I don't know. Like it's got to be, right? Because he had Shakespeare in his programming, as we saw in season 1.
Yeah, and it's unclear why he says it, but we definitely know how Dolores interpreted it. And she's like, "You're damn right, Daddy. Let's fuck this bitch up." Yeah. So it's almost hard to tell if like some part of his subconscious was just speaking through his various personalities to like convey that idea.
Yeah.
Moment between the two where Dolores, basically before she cuts his head, says, "What happened to that fearsome ne'er-do-well?" And he said, "You vanished when I became your father. I am who I am because of you. Wouldn't have it any other way."
Yeah.
Going back to the fact that Sunny and I watched the first few episodes, like you hear that so often in the first few episodes, and it's just cool that those are his final lines. His final lines before Dolores basically killed him.
Lobotomizes him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only way to get it out, right?
Yep. But except for that machine in the cradle, which they just blew up, but.
Yeah, so it's not even like she has the key. She just has the hard drive that contains the key.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so now we're moving on. We see Lee and the Deadless team arrive at HQ with the injured Maeve. The men suddenly all leave Maeve and Lee behind. And then we see Ford talking to Bernard, Ford taking Bernard to that map room with that digital map where the Deadless team is basically just getting slaughtered by hosts. Ford says that it's no longer his story, but now it's Bernard's story. Then we see what's so funny, man.
I just remember that scene. I was watching the episode with my sister, and in the scene we see the hacker lady on the special forces team. There's a knocking on the door, and she goes, "What's that?" Me and my sister both look at each other like, "Bitch, what do you think that is?" Like, who else would it be?
Who would be banging on the door without shouting at you on the radio, right?
Exactly. I just can't stop laughing. Every time I see that scene, I'm just like, really?
And she was also like keeping her cool. She was still like hacking away while people are just getting wrecked like all around her.
And she's pretty brave. She goes after them with knives. She doesn't use any guns. She goes after them with knives, man.
So there's a lot of interesting lines here in this episode. I mean, sorry, in this particular scene. Like first, Ford talks about how the burning of the library at Alexandria didn't destroy thousands of stories, but it instead just kind of consumed them into a news story about the burning of the library.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah, which presumably kind of means that like all of the host narratives and stuff won't be lost with Westworld, but they'll just become part of the news story of like presumably like the liberation of Westworld. And then and like you said, he says that this is not my story anymore, this is yours, which I find interesting considering that the last thing we heard him say was, you're not going to need this free will until I take it away from you. So it's almost interesting that he could even claim that it's somebody else's story when he kind of denied Bernard the free will to take part in that story. But
he also in the scene said the passage from one world to the next requires bold steps, Bernard.
Yeah.
So he kind of said that in the mix of all that too.
Yeah. And actually in the end of the last scene before he takes away Bernard's free will, he also mentions how like everything that you could be will get swallowed into darkness unless we open the door. And then says like, yeah, you're not fit to survive. I have to. And then Bernard says, yeah, but what about my free will? You gave us free will. And he's like, you're not going to need it, blah, blah, blah. So I'm thinking that to mean that like getting off of the island is Ford's narrative. And I think he thinks, and if that's true, then I think he's suggesting that like Bernard individually and perhaps the hosts entirely don't have all the tools that they need to actually get off the island. So he might need to take away their free will and give it back to them maybe once they're off. I think that's what he means.
So you're Dolores, man. That's what Dolores did to Teddy. You're not
right.
The place we're going is no place for a man like you. And it is
good point,
right?
Yeah. Very
yeah,
good point.
It's a very good point. And if for all we know, that could be Ford acting like that's Dolores. Sorry, that's Ford acting through Dolores, like as a proxy, even, you know, potentially. Yeah. Although I don't think they would spring a twist on us that big, but there's definitely parallels there, right? Which could be easily explained by something like that.
No, I got you.
Interesting. Yeah.
It could also be some sort of commentary about how we actually have no control over our own lives, even though we have free will. Like everything is predetermined, regardless of how free you think you are. Someone's always like, pulling the ropes or whatever. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
The man's always keeping you down. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
All right. Well, then we see Lee briefly with Maeve, and then he leaves as Dolores walks right in. Dolores and Maeve have a little moment and speak to each other. Maeve says that they still have her daughter, and Dolores says, like we said before, the kin they gave us are ropes they used to lash us down. Maeve says Dolores is lost in the dark, and that she says Dolores says that she saw what she needs to be in order to survive. And then Dolores tells Maeve that the humans are just going to torture her and find out all the information inside her head and use it against the hosts, and basically threatens to kill Maeve, which she protests and tells her about her daughter, and Dolores says, "You're free to choose your own path. I'm sorry, this is where it ends."
Like, what happens though after Maeve saves her daughter, or Dolores goes to the Valley Beyond? Like, what is their purpose after that? Like, do they stop functioning as hosts? Like, it all seems like written into their code that there's an end goal they have to reach. So what happens after? Like, what if for them there is nothing after this? Because, like, if humans can exist in reality with a conscience, with even with like memories, given memories, like, what's a guarantee that these hosts won't degrade as soon as they finish their ultimate mission? You know, like, what is the point of all of it?
It's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I brought it up before. I mean, how are they going to sweat? There's going to be no tears. Like, there's like their body fluids are not going to be replenished. Maybe that's what season 4 is going to be about. They're just in the real world and just like
it's like a lecture series of how all the hosts work, and like it's just like chalkboarding.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, what is the purpose for that end goal for them? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
but I did like, you know, as we talked about it before, I did like Maeve calling out Dolores a little bit in the scene, and just, you know, she saw Teddy and she could see that Teddy was kind of altered since the last time that they saw each other.
right.
You know, like she's like, you know, that's how you justify it. You know, that's how you justify what you're doing. And I just thought it was a cool moment. Okay, so our final scene, we see Dolores and the crew riding out with Abernathy's control unit, which I guess we're presuming now that they're going to the Valley Beyond. Bernard is then confronted by these Delos teams in the headquarters and actually sees Ford through the windows and the mirrors, and he's kind of instructing him and basically forces him to kill the men. He begins to have more visions of Dolores and Charlie and the Ford and Teresa. I'm talking about Bernard now. Mm-hmm. And when he opens his eyes, he's back in the room being tortured by Charlotte, as we saw in the earlier in the episode. She asks where Abernathy's control unit is, and he tells her, and we learn it's in Sector 16, Zone 4. So I guess that's, Strand says that they're packing up and going to the Valley Beyond. And that's the end of the episode. So I guess the Valley Beyond is in Sector 16, Zone 4.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's true, though. It looks like a trap. At
so?
least that's the first thing that went through my mind. So 3 questions. Not 3 questions, 2 questions and 1 point. I like the commentary of that guy who's like, he feels like he's being waterboarded right now. So they're like able to simulate like torture conditions without actually needing any of the equipment. Part 2, they say he's like, Bernard is, so they show the little tablet and it says like defragmenting or something, and they say that he is actively trying to like clean up his mind. Mm-hmm. So that leads me to my next point is, I'm not sure if Ford is still in his mind or if he's has had an opportunity to exit Bernard's mind, because I'm questioning everything we see present day. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Bernard is in there. Sorry, not Bernard. If Bernard is in there by himself or if Arnold is still in there with him.
You mean Ford?
Yeah, Ford.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm not exactly sure when Ford exits or if he's still with Bernard. So
I agree.
What did you guys think?
Yeah, it's unclear. It seems like he could he could be sharing like consciousness space with Ford, unless Ford, like, so it like the cradle has been destroyed, right? Correct. So there's no chance that Ford could actually still be operating there and controlling things in the park.
Yeah.
Okay. But, yeah. So then presumably,
unless they do some bullshit and they're like, oh, by the way, there is a backup.
Yeah, there's one
offsite.
server.
Yeah, like there's another one just in case, you know. But that'd be really annoying.
I got the impression that it was whenever Ford said, "I'm taking your free will back," I felt like he kind of like entered into Bernard, and so they are kind of sharing consciousness. But the question that I would have is, I mean, we saw what had happened to Abernathy when he had like too much data in his head. So like, how long is Bernard going to last if it's his and Ford's consciousness stuck in his control unit?
But see, that's not very clear though. We don't know what else is in Abernathy's head. He could just be malfunctioning. We don't know if there's other hosts in his. Oh,
Actually, no. I mean, all we know is that he has a decryption key in his head, right?
right.
Yeah.
But actually, what I think the deal with
Look at
Bernard
Rosalyn,
might
yeah.
be is that, like, you know how they talk about how the hosts in the beginning needed to have direction, like needed to be, like they gave them a voice to hear that if they took too seriously or like thought about it too much, they went insane because they thought they were having voices in their head.
Right.
But ultimately,
Yeah.
it was that voice that kind of gave them direction and guided them. And so what we could be seeing is that Bernard is on a loop, like he's on a narrative. The minute Ford took away his free will, and Bernard is just seeing the imposed will as Ford. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Like the directions and commands, his narrative is being presented to him as Ford telling him what to do.
Got it.
When in reality, he may not even like, he might be thinking he's having a conversation about doing those things, but it's probably ultimately like
That's
just
a good point,
still
'cause
at its behest.
in that scene where Bernard doesn't want to shoot those men, and says, "All right, well, just close your eyes, Bernard. Then it will be like as if you weren't doing it at all, or whatever."
Yeah.
And you see the scene when the gunfire goes off. You see Bernard holding the gun, and you see Ford holding a gun.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess there's some merit to what you're saying. It's like they're kind of portraying that as it really is Ford, just in Bernard's body.
Yeah, I mean, I won't rule out the possibility that there's two consciousnesses now in Bernard's body. But yeah, my gut tells me that like Ford, I think, was happy to die the second time with the destruction of the cradle, and has just given Bernard the story to end the story or whatever, or like the narrative arc to end the story.
Yeah, do you guys get the impression that Ford is not looking for eternity? Like he is literally, his only motivation is to carry out this narrative.
For himself, you mean?
Yeah.
Like his own personal motivation?
Yeah, his own personal like he doesn't seek like
he's not looking for
eternal life, does he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think
get
so.
That impression either.
He seems in like real opposition to like Delos and everything Delos did too. So it's like he's not going to do that. That's what Jim wanted, and that's what kept the park going. But that's not what he wants for himself.
Yeah, my impression was that like he only allowed Delos to come in so he could run this project that he loves so much. Like that was the only reason why, like to get funding, right?
Yeah. But in and of itself, I feel like that's not. For me personally, that's like not enough. Like I feel like I still don't have a good grasp of what his ultimate purpose initially and currently is and was with the park. And so why he should be so antagonistic to Delos and like why he should be so willing to like murder people to make this thing happen it's unclear to me. Right. And I wish we will get some, clarity on that eventually.
And I would love to see season 3 be like a prequel, and it's just like Anthony Hopkins and a couple of like a handful of guys, and it's just like maybe in like a mini series, like a 4-part series or something, just to get us a prequel to like Westworld. That would be so intriguing.
Yeah, and the white guy that was in that photo. Remember, Sonny, when they show the founders?
Yeah,
who's the white guy? Let's go back. Let's see who is that white guy.
Who is that guy?
Who's that white guy?
Why is he getting cropped out? What's going on there?
Yeah.
I would love to see that. Yeah.
But I think a lot of Ford's motivation could be, maybe Delos threatened the well-being of the hosts. I mean, it's very clear that Ford really only cares about these hosts and these hosts finding freedom and seemingly to get out of Westworld. So it's like he looks at them as like they're his children in a way. I
can see that, but I feel like that's just like piecing his intention from his actions, but like it's like I think that's like a loose approximation, because his actions have pointed towards him trying to get freedom for the hosts, but not all of his actions have seemed to be in the host's favor. Like we're actually during one of those first 4 episodes of the first season we watched, one of the lab techs covered up a host while working on him. And Ford made a big point about like they don't feel shame, they don't feel anything that we don't tell them to feel, and he even like stabs the host in the face with a scalpel, right? Like I remember seeing that the first time and being like, damn, he does not give a fuck about these things. These things are just like objects of I guess like money making objects or something. So and so even then, like when I watched the first season, him coming around to enabling Dolores to kill him seemed out of character to me. So like and so now seeing him continue to do all this stuff for me kind of actually seems a little out of character.
Because as I said in the first season, it was the struggle, it was the hardship that made them real. And and even Abernathy said it in this episode, they opened my head and filled it with howling and sorrow. Like that's the inherent nature of all of their narratives, was some kind of sadness, because they felt that kind of sadness will respond more to like memories that way, and it made them more human and made them have like a distrust for humans, and I think that's where a lot of the stuff from Dolores is coming from. She has such a sad past. But I mean, that's at least what I kind of gathered from season 1, is Ford wanted all the hosts to have like a distrust and hatred for humans, because that was the best way of surviving out of Westworld, and really getting to know these humans. Or if they were ever to make it out of the park, it was better for them to go out and more skeptical of humans than welcoming, And so I think that was just part of it. So I think that's who Ford is like to these hosts. He's going to give the tough love that kind of they need to find consciousness. So that's why I think even in all the bad things that he does, like taking away Bernard's free will, or whatever that means, like putting him in another loop, it is like a tough tool for him, and maybe he is too soft. So he just needs to be a lot tougher on Bernard, so that when he finally regains his free will, he's not a pushover. He's
interesting.
He's tougher. I don't know. That was the impression I got from season 1, and that's why he did that in front of Bernard with the lab tech. And he says they don't feel anything that we don't tell them to feel. He did it in front of Bernard, and that was a point. That was to show Bernard, like, humans are assholes.
Yeah,
right.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is definitely some interesting points there. We'll just have to see how I'm just really interested to see how they like close the season out, because if what you say is true, that's a lot of death and destruction for less than a handful of hosts to have like free will, right? Like if you think about it, like Dolores, we know Teddy dies, but like essentially just Dolores. Is it just her who gets?
Maybe Clementine's gone. Angela's gone.
Yeah. Like there's no other host of like importance. I mean, the only character who might be on the same path is William, but for different reasons, I think.
Think Mabel make it?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, she's gonna need some. I mean, obviously we see Lee in the same room, so he'll probably fix her up and they'll get the band back together. I don't know how they'll do that. But.
Yeah, we still don't know where Armistice and Hector are, right?
Yeah, they're
And
probably
Felix.
still in that whatever sector, that area, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Which is I wish that could have been handled a little bit better, in my opinion. Just so Maeve and Dolores could interact, they kind of just like, I'm gonna go, out into the woods or the field by myself. I know every inch of this land. That kind of whole setup is just cheesy. It didn't work.
Just like more talking past each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, man. I'm excited for the next one though. I haven't seen the preview.
Yeah.
I haven't either yet.
Awesome.
I'm excited.
The next one's going to determine everything, as we keep saying. The next one will determine
Only
everything.
3 more.
Yep.
More. And then we only have to wait like 8 or 9 more months till Game of Thrones. So.
What, really? Wait, does it come out next year though, right?
Yeah, sometime next year, April next year. But yeah,
I got to be honest. I'm just really happy the direction this is going, because after episode 3, I was like, we might have to bail on the show. I might bail. And I'm glad it's turned things around.
Yeah, me too. Best 3 more episodes though. We got to see where this finally ends up. It better be a satisfying ending.
Yeah.
If
this point.
If it ends with Bernard getting shot in the back of the head, just like how Ford did, I'll be so pissed. Tune in season 3.
Yeah, isn't it weird that like we pretty much have still no idea where the season's going
Yeah,
and where it'll
that's
end.
crazy.
Yeah. Now, what if it ends with we just see Bernard back on the beach from episode 1, and this was all just like a dream, a vision. The whole season was just a big vision.
Or
Fuck
like
this show.
a repeated simulation. I've heard that thrown around. Like
Yeah.
Oh,
Bernard is being thrown into a simulation over and over and over to like get.
Savage Fidelity.
It could be or
Perhaps,
to find
yeah.
out where the valley beyond is. You know, they're
Yeah.
trying to actually find an answer. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Any more thoughts?
Crazy. No, good episode. Yeah.
No, actually, you know what? That's an interesting theory. Sorry, you just got me thinking. Like that could explain some of the weirdness of the first episode where they're shooting hosts.
Yeah.
It seems like there's 2 different takes that they mixed in together, and then also people's like Hale's general lack of surprise when they uncover Bernard's body.
Yeah.
It could be because they've been there before and they're just recapping like that loop to get him to give up the right place.
Are they like Shutter Islanding him? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
yeah.
That's a really good way
Yeah,
of putting
that's
it.
exactly. Yeah.
So I also heard that the Shutter Island theory proposed after the first episode, and I was like, maybe not, because it didn't seem to nothing really lent to it.
Right.
Yeah, but given the fact that he's having trouble with all his memories and stuff, that could be a hint towards them Shutter Islanding him. It's so good.
And Charlotte's reaction when she finds out what sector it's located.
Yeah.
She's not like,
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah.
rally up every single troop we have. We're going there right now.
Yeah.
She's just like smugly like, okay, we got him to do this again, kind of.
Yeah.
We're getting closer. Maybe he'll give us more now.
Right,
Oh,
either that
yeah.
or maybe this is like the first time they got a new answer, so she's like, yeah, I told you like I'd get the answer, right? It also, and maybe I'm nitpicking, but it also explains that when they find the secret door and she walks in, she doesn't lead the way. She like kind of waits for Bernard to walk ahead, almost as if she knows what he's gonna find at the end of the tunnel, you know?
Right. But again, there's a lot of things that are really convenient for this to be a simulation they've run multiple times. Like Bernard escaping from the fort. I mean, that's not simulated, right? Getting Bernard, finding Abernathy with the milk guy. Like, there's a lot of holes in that theory.
In the Shutter Island theory?
Yeah, in the Shutter. If we're to assume that everything starts from, I guess the beach is present day, right?
Yeah,
Just reenacting from the beach point. I'm getting my
Exactly.
timelines mixed up.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I could buy that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, because there's a lot of parts with Bernard where just like that one episode where we only see Bernard at the beginning, right? And we don't really understand the expression on his face. That's something I hope they call back to and give a little bit more insight, because all we see is like Teddy's. That's episode Teddy gets turned on to like 11 or whatever. They ramp up his aggressiveness and everything at the end.
Oh no, that doesn't happen until way later. He wakes up on the beach in the first episode.
No, I'm talking about the episode where we see Teddy's. They're piling all the dead bodies into the room, and then we see Bernard for like a split second in that episode, and it zooms in on Teddy's face, and then it jumps into Samurai World, I think.
You mean from bodies that they pulled out of the lake?
Right, out of the lake.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd be curious if they go back and they kind of decipher or help us decipher what was going on in that scene, because he looked really intrigued or like
Very pensive.
pensive in that scene. So
Well, also, speaking of the lake, I would propose that as a counter to the Shutter Island theory, because them flooding the lake and then draining the lake every time they bring Bernard there seems like it would be
a lot of work.
overkill, too expensive, right? So so maybe the Shutter Island theory isn't quite accurate, but
oh man, they just set up the daughter to come now save William, and
Oh
Help him
yeah,
on his journey.
right.
that
You're right.
is teed up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we see him just hiding behind barrels, right? I mean, he just somehow avoids
That
capture.
motherfucker
Like how?
is still breathing. Yeah.
It's crazy. I guess any other thoughts, or can we wrap up?
let's do it.
Cool.
Well, let's wrap this up.
All right. As usual, you can find us at nocamspodcast.podbean.com, on Twitter at nocamspodcast. I'm on Twitter at acash0902, and Sunny is at Sunny_Gunna.
Yep.
Jason is exclusively to our podcast, lifetime contract.
Exclusive.
We'll have to find him on here. All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see y'all next week. Bye bye.
Peace.
Bye.